What is it you want, Barry? What do you want? You want the moon? Just say the word and I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, dying times here.
Come with me if you want to live.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
The Force will be with you, always.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to 20th Century Geek. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and we are back on the desert island, and we're going to be talking some comics. Desert Island comics. These are the comics that you would choose to take to the desert island with you. They make you you might enjoy them, or you might read them, or they might make you think. There could be any reason, but these are the ones that this person has chosen. And today, I am being joined by my brother from another mother, the man, the legend that is Julian Darius, a co-host from Stories Out of Time and Space. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I'm doing great. I'm confused as to where's the Story Out of Time and Space theme music. I just don't know what I'm doing without it.
It's that intro, because obviously I do the same intro for everyone. I have to engage my brain to sort of not say, when I say welcome back to, yeah, there's that thing of automatically say Stories Out of Time and Space. But you're joining me today for our Desert Island comics. I've wanted to do this for a while. I haven't got around to it really. So what are we going to be talking about today? Give us a rundown of the comics that you have chosen for us to talk about today.
Well, the first one is Flash #1 from 1987. This is the beginning of the Mike Baron run on the post-Crisis on Infinite Earths Flash. The second is Miracle Man 16 from 1989. This is the final issue of Alan Moore's run. And then my own Kimot Ren #5 from, I think it was 2020.
I think so.
That's right. Yeah.
I'll check. Yes.
I had to check with you whether that was okay. I was like, but I took the desert island question seriously because to me, I thought, well, if I'm really taking these to a desert island, there are so many possibilities to choose from. I thought, I've got to go with those two. And I thought, I've spent so much time and energy making my own comics. I'd like to, on a desert island, have some memorial of the fact that I grew up with this stuff and then I wound up producing this stuff. So
yeah, good. And the other thing as well, I'd say, I will get to it when we speak about Kimot Ren, but knowing you as well, I can imagine that being sort of a double-edged sword where you sit and you'll read it and you'll enjoy it and you'll appreciate what you've worked, and then there'll be a time you're like, I could have changed this, and and you'll let it bug you. But we'll get to it. I really enjoyed it actually. But anyway, we're going to start from the beginning. We're going to start with, let's say, the post-Crisis Flash. I've never read the Mike Baron run. I've read post-Crisis. Obviously, I've read Crisis, but in post-Crisis, I've read like Superman, Man of Steel, read Batman, and a few of the little bits, but not really ever read. But I know this is a big run because this is actually, like I say, it's the introduction of Wally West as the Flash. It's post the death of Barry Allen. Spoilers for those that have never read Crisis on Infinite Earth. But yeah, so I was curious because one of the things I'm going to ask you then is Wally West your Flash?
Yes, without a doubt. And this was, I had read some of the Barry Allen Flash growing up. I was always partial to Flash, but I am very much of this generation. I mean, this was the first comic that I collected every single issue of and just followed month to month. It was in that sense, it was nowhere near my first comic. I had read them since I was a little kid, but I was about 10. I was 10 when this came out. So this was my first serious comic. And Wally West, I followed from the moment he was Flash onward. And so, yeah, Flash is my Flash. And the idea of the DC Universe as a generational place where things happen and changes occur. Robin becomes Nightwing. Flash dies. Wally West succeeds him. And then later on, Hal Jordan goes bad and there's a new Green Lantern. those events were very much, and the generational feel to DC Comics was very much from the beginning inscribed in everything I appreciated from the DC universe. That change mattered. Barry Allen wasn't going to come back. And so, yeah, Wally West is my Flash, and everything that I liked about the DC universe doesn't exist anymore.
It is interesting that you say that, because reading this is obviously from an era that I'm not hugely familiar with, because it's sort of, I come in a little bit later, and I came in more through Marvel, sort of like in the 80s, 90s. But yeah, this idea of it being generational, as you say, sort of like, you know, Wally West, and he in this issue actually has him sort of like celebrating sort of like, you know, his 20th birthday. He's leaving the Teen Titans to become the Flash. And so there is this idea of things like growing up, and people will move on and do different things. It seems, I can imagine this being exciting as a kid when you're like, yeah, you know, these are all the characters and they're grown up and they're going to become these new things. And why did that stop? Because obviously there's the return of Barry Allen. Which is Jeff Johns. Is it Jeff Johns that did that?
Yes, it is, isn't it?
Yeah, I know you have certain feelings regarding Jeff Johns.
Well, I mean, I do think he's a good writer. He's certainly done a lot of stuff that I appreciate, and he's had a lot of ideas that I appreciate, even if I struggle here and there with the execution. But he's also written some terrible stuff along the way. But beyond that, I could not get over bringing Hal Jordan back and bringing Barry Allen back. And I think what that was rooted in was really people feeling as if these were the definitive versions of the characters, in the same way that Wally West was the definitive Flash for me. You know, a lot of people, if you grew up in the 60s or you grew up with a Super Friends cartoon or something like that, these were, you know, Kyle Rayner does not look like Green Lantern should be. And if you really love, what I don't understand about this is that Barry Allen didn't have a personality. Hal Jordan didn't have a personality. I'm sorry, you know, that's an exaggeration, okay? But Barry Allen was goody two shoes, right?
Yes.
He was the hero who was not tormented. And Hal Jordan had more of a rambunctious, you know, rebellious personality. But, you know, neither personality and characterization was not remotely as important from the 60s to the 80s. And it's in the 80s, especially under, you know, Claremont and Alan Moore, that this stuff really starts coming in. And so, to get back to this issue, for me as a kid, it's funny that we want to have like audience identification figures, and we think, oh, you gotta put a kid in because we want kids to watch it. I was at 10. I didn't want to watch 10 years old. I didn't want to read about other 10 years old. I wanted to read about young adults. I wanted to understand what adulthood was like, and I could actually kind of see ways in which Mike Barron's Flash screwed me up because he is a womanizer, and he is, you know, of course, he's coming of age in Ronald Reagan's America. This is the Wall Street America where Mike Barron is brilliant. I mean, regardless of his politics, which I disagree with, I mean, he was you know, and remains a brilliant writer. And when Flash asks about money to run a hard across country, I've never read, I mean, nothing like that had been done in a comic before.
It took me by surprise.
Yeah.
Reading this, I mean, just to give people an overview, like basically the gist of this comic as introduction is Wally West. It starts with him as like a birthday party for his 20th, and all the Teen Titans are there, and it's all sort of celebrating. And then he is called off to do something, and it is to get a heart for a transplant from wherever this is. I don't know whatever city the Flash is in.
From New York.
From New York, literally across country.
To Seattle, yeah.
Yeah, and he basically collars the doctors. He's like, all right, well, yeah, no, I can do this, but it comes at a cost to me. So like, what's in it for me? You know. And so they said, well, what is it you want? And he actually sort of lays it on the line. He says, well, you're going to cover my medical expenses, or you're going to cover my medical. You know, you've got it. You're employed. You get paid to do these things, but you're calling on me and expecting me to do this. And there is a cost to me, like time and other stuff. And obviously, because they've depowered the Flash as they did with all the superheroes, sort of post-crisis. So he can only run 704 miles an hour now. Is his top speed. So it will still take him 3 hours to run across country. So I loved that there was like a limit on this stuff. But I was a bit taken aback with the superhero going like, no, this isn't free because it's not free on me. So I've got to cover this stuff. So yeah, that was a bit of a shocker to me, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, and it's still revolutionary. For me, this was so much of what I liked about the post-crisis slate of DC titles was the energy from Miracle Man and from Watchmen and Dark Knight. That revisionism was being funneled into the mainstream titles. And I had not read Watchmen when I read this. I had not read Dark Knight yet. For me, this was my introduction to these ideas. And I should also point out the concept that Flash has to eat a lot to keep his metabolism up also originates in this issue. Nobody had ever done that before.
I was going to ask
you see that on TV. That's ripped off from that's ripped off, right? That's was invented by Mike Barron.
It makes sense. If you do that, your metabolism's going to be through the roof. So, although there's a weird joke in this, which I was going to ask about, because there's a couple of things where I'm like, I'm not sure if I understand this. So because Wally West doesn't come. I'm not sure if comes across well or not. So there's a bit early on, it's in the very beginning of the comic, and Cyborg's talking to him, and he's eating all this food to build up his calories. He says, "Yeah, man, he just packs it in and never shows it. You'd eat like that too if you burned a zillion calories a minute." And then I believe it's sort of Wally West's blonde girlfriend says, "Oh, I'm so jealous." And he says, "Believe me, it's not all chitlins and gravy. I can't go bopping off whenever I feel like it and system else." And then you have Cyborg sort of looking to the side and going like, "Chitlins and gravy." And I was like, is that supposed to be some sort of like, a racial joke?
He's literally
basically
giving a side eye to the reader.
Yeah. And I was like, I'm not sure I get that, but I get the feeling that that's not good.
Yeah. I mean, so this was weird for me because I was 10, and I think the writing here is incredibly sophisticated, and it was way above what I was used to reading. So there were so many metaphors in adult situations and things that, I mean, I remember just struggling with, there's so many metaphors. When he's talking about Barry Allen, he says, he left me his costumes and a picture of what a hero should be. I remember at one point saying like, well, where is this photograph?
Yeah.
I mean, I was a 10-year-old and I had dumb thoughts, but I remember going through that kind of thing. So for me, it would have been at the time like, what is this expression, all chitlins and gravy? From context, it means it's all good. I don't know that this is a real expression, but clearly it's kind of like, is this Southern? Is this black food? Like what is, so there's the side eye from Cyborg. But to get to your point, I think one of the most amazing things about this entire run is that you're not supposed to like the Flash. That Barron is such a good writer that, in interviews, he'll talk about how the point is that it's interesting. And he wasn't trying to do a deconstructive manifesto like Watchmen, but he thought, look, it's interesting having a superhero ask for money. And point out like the Teen Titans doesn't pay me a pension. What do you think I do? I'll do it for free. But look, you're getting paid here. Everybody's getting paid here. This is a big business. I'm doing a big service for you. I think that's interesting. And Mike Barron thought it was interesting. And I think Barron thought it was interesting to have Wally West be somebody who was not necessarily the most likable, identifiable character. And I think he's right. And to this day, I still enjoy unlikable narrators. I resent when a writer makes it easy and they don't have to be a Mary Sue, but somebody is just so likable and they always make the right choices and they don't struggle with it. You know, people have edges. Even the people you admire most, are human beings, and we're probably a dick at 20.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, it's true. That's the thing. Like I say, when you're 20, you're full of, bravado and stuff, and you are probably going to ask for these things, and especially if you already have been Kid Flash, and there's clearly. I like the fact that it happens sort of several times, and there's clearly a bit of a resentment of him having to correct people because they go, Wally West, that's Kid Flash. He's like, no, now it's just the Flash. No, like that legitimization is like, no, look, I'm now the Flash, and he sort of has to resent sort of having to correct people. But yeah, this thing, like say throughout it, even sort of, the interactions towards the end. There's the plane ride home, as well. Sort of like he does all this stuff, and he hurts his hand, and it's sort of like, he's like, yeah, I could heal this in a couple of days. It'll cost me because I've got all this stuff. So, but why shouldn't I take some time off? Why shouldn't I get to heal normally? And sort of, there's this sort of sense of, he understands there are sort of, I don't know, I don't want to use the phrase, but like, with great power comes great responsibility kind of stuff. But he's also like, well, yeah, but I'm still human. Like I've still got my needs. Like I'm not just there to fulfill this obligation of a hero. And I kind of like that like, like he's human. He is a bit of a dick, but we all have that moment where we're like, no, I'm being selfish because I need to. So, I sort of get it.
Yeah, and he's not. We went on to see stuff like The Boys.
Yeah.
Right. We've seen other superheroes who are less kind. He's not a bad guy. And I always liked him. I still do. But he's struggling, as you say, he's struggling to figure out who he is. And, I certainly identified with this growing up in my parents' shadow, as all of us do, and trying to figure out what it meant to be a man, what it meant in a very different culture than they grew up in, and with no instructions on the matter from anyone, how do you balance your needs versus doing what you think is right and all of that.
Yeah, and as you said, I think this idea as well. He says, he left me his costume and a picture of what a hero should be. You can take it as like, oh, he gave me this inspirational platform or this thing to look up to. Yeah, but it also gave you a shadow to live in.
Absolutely.
And that sort of like, so you can see it in that moment. Like it's not all good. Yeah, it's not all chitlins and gravy. It goes both sides. Like there's clearly the thing of like, well, Barry Allen was the Flash. He was this, and he sacrificed himself to save the multiverse. So, yeah, I've now got a big shadow to live in, and there's always going to be that moment. So that phrasing of like, he left me his costume and he sort of that picture of being a hero is two-edged. It's double-edged. And so I find that really interesting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that I think is realistic, and that would continue throughout this run. He was succeeded by Bill Messner-Loebs, who did a fantastic run up until issue 60, early 60s, and then Mark Waid took over and did like the Return of Barry Allen story. It's not really Barry Allen, by the way, but there were several stories that were like intended to resolve this inferiority complex. And one was around issue 50, and then the Return of Barry Allen is the one that kind of stuck more. But the weird thing about bringing Barry Allen back is that Wally West not only had established himself as the Flash for a generation, but also had more character. I identified more with somebody who was imperfect and who had struggled than I did somebody who was just always perfect. I mean, Barry was, I never thought of it at the time, but he was obviously a conservative, right? He had a sort of like military crew cut. He was a police scientist. And here's this latchkey kid who became Kid Flash. And he really was, especially in the post-crisis continuity, his parents were kind of terrible. And he went to psychiatry in later issues by Mike Barron. And so, I identified with how he was screwed up, and I think they really lost something in not grounding that, deeper character with the Flash.
Yeah, it's interesting because my exposure to Wally West has been a lot more recent, but also my actual exposure to the Flash is Justice League Unlimited, the cartoon, which I believe that's the Wally West Flash in that, I believe, because that because he's got the darker costume. Because he obviously this costume changes slightly. It becomes a darker sort of red and all this other stuff, and he becomes
the lightning bolts kind of become angled down at his crotch.
Yes, yeah, and it's the eyes go the white, the Batman eyes, and that sort of thing. So they have all that. But it's the same with like John Stewart. Like John Stewart was the first Green Lantern I got to know because of the Justice League Unlimited. So it's weird to see these characters and then, like I say, have the originals come back. But reading this as well, it's interesting to see the Wally West that I know from reading sort of like again things like recently like Rebirth and a couple of other sort of like I've gone back and read sort of like a couple of not DC 52. New 52 books. So see the character clearly evolved to the extent of him becoming so iconic as the character that when they've brought back Barry Allen or reference Barry Allen, they give him the traits of Wally West. So the Flash becomes more identifiable with these characteristics as the hero rather than the alter ego. I just find that really interesting. Like people, I remember when Ezra Miller's depiction of the Flash in the Justice League film, everyone was like, "Well, he's more Wally West than he is Barry Allen."
Absolutely, yeah. It's just not Barry Allen. I mean, you can't picture Barry as, a puckish 20-year-old kid, right? I mean, that's just not who Barry was. And when they brought Barry back with Rebirth and everything, he suddenly had personality crises, right? He was part of the whole point of DC generally, but certainly of Barry Allen, was that he wasn't traumatized. He was a goody two shoes who in the best way, right? He didn't struggle with great power comes great responsibility. He was a police scientist. He knew what the right thing was. He understood these things. He did get a little angsty as his wife died and everything near the end of that run, but he never was uncertain what direction good was. And suddenly in the revived version, there's trauma with his parents because everyone's got to be Batman now. I mean, and it's just a horrible pastiche of a character. But I think that you're right that this is, the Wally West stuff really stuck in that sense.
Yeah, it's interesting though. This era, this period seems to have been post-crisis is like it seems to me, and again I don't know enough about the history of it and I've not read enough, but reading this in little bits and pieces, it feels like DC has sort of gone, we want to do these things, we're going to ground them a little bit more, but we're actually going to be a bit more daring in the characterizations and have thought of things like consequences and this other stuff. I mean, it's a bit later on, but I've read the first 30 or so issues of John Ostrander's Spectre.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. And again, like, it's got this whole thing about like he wipes out like an entire country at one point, and you sort of and there's all consequences to it. And it's like, no, DC was doing stuff where they were really pushing the bounds of the characters, and you can see it in this issue where they're like, oh no, we're going to do stuff, and it's going to hit you hard, and it's going to hit you fast. the issue ends with him winning the lottery, like in his crappy apartment.
Yeah.
And then straight after he finds like a heart, which I'm assuming is the heart he's just delivered, which is
No, it's the heart of that reporter that he. So while he's running the heart cross country,
yes,
there's this great sequence where he passes Vandal Savage. This was my introduction to Vandal Savage, best version of Vandal Savage ever, by the way. Really looking sort of in this Victorian coat and everything.
Yeah, that last page is awesome.
Yeah, no, and he had a kind of old world sophistication that is absent from the sort of like super villainy version of Vandal Savage. But anyway, so Flash is running this hard cross country, and I love that it takes like miles for this image to sort of go through his brain, and by the time he stops, he's got to go back miles. This realism that Baron brings to the character. And by then Vandal Savage is, disappears. But so that's the heart of that reporter at the end. But what you see in close up, right? I mean, like this is, yeah, okay. So it's a little hokey that he wins the lottery, right? I mean, I sort of hate that these days. But again, it was something interesting to do with this character who clearly struggles with money, and see how that personality struggles now having money and what they would do. So something interesting to do with a character that is not all that normal. But that ending with Vandal Savage was real horror, right? Like this is not a mature reader's comic.
No, I mean it's the last sort of like 3 or 4 panels. Like you said, there's a box with a heart, a literal heart, not even like you get a close up of it with the blood and this other stuff. And then he's about to change into the costume, and then Vandal Savage is sort of like says, live as the Flash, die as the Flash, and that's the end. And you're like, hang on, like it's a great cliffhanger. That's it. Like it's an introduction post crisis. This is a boomer place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love to get back to sort of the writing. I had never read anything like this. I had read sort of a lot of silly superhero comics, but even when he discovers the heart, he's just won the lottery, and he says, the smell, this is not from Francine. You find the present, right? Presumably for his birthday party. The hair along the base of my skull stands straight up, and earlier when there's a line in here that has become a sort of standard reference for me, a sort of expression, but is for nobody else. It's not chitlins and gravy. It is when he is proposing the being paid in health insurance for going across the country. And he says, the question is, what can you do for me? And then there's a caption that says, they look like I spit on the carpet or something. The minute yawns. I love we all know what that feels like, right? That like the spit on the carpet thing. Like sometimes I'll say something in mixed company and I'll think like, oh, that's the spit on the carpet moment. Like I just was a little too blunt. And even just the minute yawns, that's so much better than there's a pregnant pause or something like that. And I think the idea that spitting on the carpet should just be a standard English expression.
No, yeah, I do. It's because it captures that moment perfectly. Because you can feel that tension in the next couple of panels. So yeah, no, it is. It's really good. I do like the writing because again, like, I want to quickly talk about the art in a minute.
Yeah.
But there's two. I want to sort of say this thing where he goes to the hospital to pick this thing up. There's 2 people in the room. There's a woman who sort of let him in, and then this doctor. And there's another moment I thought was quite interesting. So they're talking about the doctor saying, we've got a patient in Seattle, got to get them this heart. And he says, oh, but of course you should know I'm not a member of the Titans and receive no funding from them. If I have to do 2,000 miles flat out, there's a cost to me. You are not asking a casual favor, which is fair. He's having to expel energy and power to do this. But the woman looks at him, and again, she looks at him with like side eye, and she's like, she's pissed off. And she says, would it help if you knew who the patient is? And he's like, no, I already told you I'll do it.
Mhm.
I'm just saying that, like, you know, but the question is what you, Dan it gets into this, but the question is what would you do for me? But he's not saying like he's not saying like I'm not going to do this. I'm just saying to you, this isn't, you know, this is a service I'm providing, and you know, people get paid to do the thing they're good at. So why shouldn't I get paid? Like, you know, but again, I like the fact that their expectation is, you know, it says is the Barry Allen approach. They're expecting him to turn up and be like, of course, pop it on and I'll be on my way.
Yeah, on Super Friends, nobody ever says, "Okay, I'm performing a risky service for you," right? Like you're asking a tremendous athletic feat out of me, right? Like I am an Olympic level athlete, and you're asking me to do a prolonged run for you. What am I getting paid? You know, look, I'll do it for anything, but to be fair, I should be compensated here. Well, right. Yeah, absolutely. That's not a, you know, but man, people hated this. People really hated this version of Falling West. And in fact,
Really?
yeah, I mean, it was very controversial. In later issues, there's some sort of like women in swimsuits and Wally is sort of, you know, cheats on Francine. He gets involved with a married woman. There's a famous cover where the married woman's is Tina McGee, who has now gone on to be in other things, and her husband takes this, you know, serum to give himself super speed, except you know, it distorts his body like steroids. And there's this wonderful cover as he's like crashing through the window, menacing them, and he, you know, says like, "Clearly, you took my wife," and it's like a dime novel, you know, romance cover.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's so dramatic, but also a situation where you'd never expect a superhero to be. And so what's funny is there was an entire generation that said, you like, you ruined Flash, right? Like Wally West ruined Flash. And then I was the generation that said, no, this is, you know, I liked Flash before, but this is my Flash. This taught me so much about comics and what comics should be. This was my entrance point into, yeah, I probably read this, you know, 100 times. This was getting serious about what comics could be, started for me right here. So, you know, every generation has a different thing. And this is one reason why I can be really mean about like the revivals and some of the New 52 stuff and just how bad it is, just from an objective quality standpoint of writing, you know, production, etc. Having said that, I am the most tolerant about some new take in a movie or something, like, you know what, the new Batman movie, it's going to be what it's going to be. It's going to be a new Batman for another generation. I don't have to like it. If I like it, great. If I don't, it's okay. These concepts can get reinvented. I just hope that it's quality or a new take that is so much committed to itself like this one is.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. Like I say, committing to itself is the point, isn't it? Like if they did this for 3 issues, then we're like, oh, actually, this isn't working. We're going to change him up, and you know, he's going to become a nice guy. Then it feels, you know, they lost the spirit of their convictions. But with this, it feels like a statement of intent as well. Like, no, this is the direction we're going. But what I'm hearing you saying is, if the internet had been around in 1987, if Twitter had been around in 1987, there would have been #NotMyFlash.
Yes.
All over
absolutely.
the place. Cool. No, the final thing I wanted to talk about was the art, and not to heavily criticize it because it's very much of its era, and I do kind of like 80s art. You know, sort of like 70s into 80s art. There's some artists I really like. Jackson Goyce in this though, I think this is a sort of like 80s thing. This party is to celebrate Wally West's 20th birthday. However, he's drawn like a 35-year-old man.
Yeah.
Even Cyborg at one point, and what it is, it's interesting because it's something. It's a bugbear of mine in art. I see, is eye creases.
Yeah.
So corner of the eyes and stuff. Everyone looks slightly worn out and slightly sort of aged. And it's just like they can't. And I find this, even artists today do it. Like, this isn't a thing of this period. It's artists today. Some artists can't draw a distinction between age, between sort of like young and middle age and stuff. And so there are artists where you'll see like Bruce Wayne stood next to sort of Dick Grayson or probably not the others, but maybe like Dick Grayson, and you'd be like, yeah, they're exactly the same age.
Yeah.
They look like different body types, but they just look exactly the same age. And I find it really hard. But in this, I am watching and going like, yeah, Wally West looks about 35, which is fine. But like the fact they're celebrating his 20th birthday sort of makes it quite funny.
Yeah, there's a panel in here where I thought he looks just like McNulty in The Wire, which he should not look like that at 20. I want to stick up for Jackson Goose though, because Butch Jackson Goose, because I mean he has admitted that like he struggled with proportions, like, especially as this run goes on. You see just sort of legs that are like a foot or two longer than they should be. But
there is one in there. There's a panel. There's a panel where the Flash is in full stride, and he's running between panels, and the legs look bandy is the only way I could describe them. But I know how hard that is.
Well, I mean, and he sort of, it's like the Kirby foreshortening thing. But I mean, you look at Kirby's anatomy is all over the place. We forget that. I love Jackson Goose's art, and I think that it comes from that school of sort of George Perez's sort of ultra realism, except it has those sort of exaggerated, like he struggles with, the age of face is a totally legitimate. He struggles with, especially in this period, the sort of elongated limbs, and sort of things like that. But I mean, it's not like, Rob Liefeld, where it's like, the foot is twice as big as the head, or like late Frank Miller or something. It's not like that. It's very much in that sort of. Phil Jimenez is now an inheritor of that sort of ultra realistic sort of detailed style. And I love that style. I mean, that is a style that even in like European comics, I think it translates. It doesn't look to me like a superhero style. Definitely his idiosyncrasies with the stretched limbs do, but there's something superhero-y to this. But I like that it is going for this sort of, realistic, very detailed look.
Yeah, one of the things I'll always compliment an artist on is backgrounds. And one of the things that sort of like gets on my wick at times is endless panels of just a character and nothing in the background, just a coloured background. Now there's a couple of those in here, and I don't mind it in that sense if there's a couple, like, and in some cases you can get away with it, but there's very few. And then when there are them, like there's incredibly detailed panels of buildings and the snow, when he's running through the snow, there's the mountain ranges and all this other stuff, and that looks great. And I will always, anyone who's going to spend, any artist that's going to spend the time to give you a detailed background, even the hospital stuff is really good. Yeah. So I will compliment that. The age of the faces was just a nitpick. I thought it was quite funny. And again, like you say about that, the static image of the last page is awesome. The shadow on it and the lighting in it and the detail and stuff is really cool. So no, that it is good. I would say is my introduction to Butch Guice probably comes a lot later. Actually, was when he actually did. He was the artist for quite a while on. He followed Steve Epting on Ed Brubaker's Captain America.
Oh yeah.
And he was great on that. I love his art on that. But yeah, I just wanted to be a prick and nitpick on this really.
Well, yes. and he was a lot younger in these days, yeah. and I think there are elements to his earlier stuff that I like better than his later stuff. But I mean, he definitely did filter out some of those things that we do struggle with looking at that here.
Yes.
Although I'm very forgiving about comics art. I'm not. I'm a writer, so I am hypercritical of writing. Any writing or even storytelling, which also can be an artist. I tend to be hypercritical of. But art, it's like, yeah, So if you're drawing a 20-year-old, how many lines do you put on that face, right? I mean, yes, at the end of the day, there's an impression that leaves, and you're dead right about that impression. But at the same time, I look at that and I say, I'm not an artist. He's choosing to, articulate that crease, and, all right, that's fine.
Yeah, and again, like some panels are a bit hard, and anatomy is incredibly difficult. Like I've drawn in my time, and anatomy, especially in the moment, you can draw something. I've done it before. You draw something, and you'll go, yeah, that looks great, and you'll go away for half an hour, and you'll come back, and you're like, why does it now look like I've drawn a pretzel? Like it looks awful. So
yeah,
I know that I know that confusion and pain. Anyway, any final thoughts then on Flash #1 from 1987?
I think it's a lost classic. I mean, they did do a trade paperback called Terminal Velocity that collects all the Mike Baron stuff plus the first few issues of the Bill Messerlob stuff that resolve the final storyline. And there are moments in there that are a little cringe, but overall there are so many moments that are stunningly fantastic, and they really have stuck in my head and have had as much influence on my appreciation of comics and my appreciation of what superhero stories can be as anything else.
No, I gotta say I enjoyed it. It's going on my to read list. I'm going to go on Comixology and probably get a couple more because I want to see more of this. Actually, I think it'd be quite worth. Like you say, it's an interesting character I don't know a lot about, and it seems like a good place to start, really. So I will be reading some more of this.
Excellent.
Anyway, let's move on to your next selection. So we move forward a couple of years to 1989, and a book that obviously had a sporadic publication history, but eventually we got the end of it, and this is Miracle Man #16 is the final book, as you said, the last of Alan Moore's books, but the final book of it's chapter 6 of book 3,
right?
Olympus, and this follows possibly one of the most mind-meltingly violent and heartbreaking issues of a comic I've ever read. Sort of like Miracle Man 15 is up there as one of the most sort of incredible comics ever. It has the Battle of London between Miracle Man and Kid Miracle Man, and the death of Johnny Bates, which is I'm not going to spoil it if anyone ever read it, because you will learn that Julian and I are big Miracle Man fans. Like, this is one of my favorite Alan Moore series, and any chance to talk Miracle Man is always good. So, but I'll let you talk because you chose it. So why number 16?
Well, I think I come back to writing. I come back to, this is one of the most exquisitely written superhero comics that has ever been made. It may be the best written superhero comic ever. Yes, 15 is the one that everyone remembers. The shock of London is destroyed, and the creativity in that, and way before, 30 years before, Man of Steel. Right. I mean, it's just the idea that in a real world, superheroes are going to F shit up, right? But that is, I shouldn't say easy to do, right? That is what everyone blames revisionism for, right? They blame it for being dark and violent. Here is the hard work. It's easy to get to a dramatic conclusion. I shouldn't say easy, but I mean, that's one thing. Everybody tries that. It's what happens afterward. It's always, for me, what happens after the climax. Like, congratulations, you've saved the world again. Yeah, but, at the end of Avengers, everybody knows aliens are here, and we've lost 500,000 people in New York City, and the world will never be the same. What happens to religion? What happens to culture? What happens to geopolitics?
Mhm.
All the other nations of the world are going to complain. You've got superheroes. Yeah. That is a much more interesting story. And issue 16 tells that story in
Yeah.
32 pages and two covers. So 2 inside covers. So it is a stunning masterpiece of writing. And I think that just like I look back on Flash #1 and I think like, you know, you don't need a hijacking on the airplane to like have another action scene. I know that, especially in those days, you know, all right, another action scene. But I always think like, how many bank robberies are these superheroes just happening to pass? I've never seen a bank robbery in my life. How many hijackings have you been on a plane for? But it was a much more realistic way of writing, much more poetic. Here is Alan Moore's final statement on superheroes until he comes back in a totally different, let's just have them be fun mode. And this is what people forget about revisionism, which was bringing a kind of literary intelligence to comics. And people praise Swamp Thing for this and these phrases in Swamp Thing. But more than anything else, this was Alan Moore straining to write sort of the ultimate literary superhero comic as his swan song, not just to Miracle Man, which he'd been writing for a decade, but also to his farewell, really, to the superhero genre. And it feels like it.
Yeah, this is a final statement. I mean, you know, you're right. I mean, one of the things is, you know, Alan Moore is you know, the Watchmen guy. Everyone talks about Watchmen, and Watchmen's fine. It's good. I'm not going to fine. It is very good. It's, you know, it's often at the top of, you know, many lists, and rightfully so. But there's something about Watchmen that, whilst good, feels sort of restrictive in a weird way. Like, it, you know, maybe it's because I've read it so many times, I don't know. This feels more impactful. This feels more operatic. You know, this sort of, there's moments in this that are just, this issue is, it, like you say, it's absolutely fabulous. And you know, to finish off with this, because again, there are easy options for this finish. You know, there was an easy option for this epilogue issue, because this is an epilogue, in you know, many ways. But he doesn't take the easy route. Alan Moore never takes the easy route. and so there's like moments in this book that are just so sort of page after page. I mean, basically, this is a statement of intent of what the world should be. And some of it you can go, all right, it's not that simple, that sort of thing. And it's easy to back it up when you are Miracle Man, which is sort of the point. But there's still points in this book where you just go, yeah, that's. In fact, there's a comment I'm going to get to. There's a statement in this book that I'm like, I think when I read it, I was like, no, that feels a bit funny. Now I read it, and I'm like, no, that's completely accurate. Like, he nailed this after the. So basically, what it is, following the Battle of London, Miracle Man and Miracle Woman and the others that he sort of, the Warp Smiths and everything else, have basically decided that, well, they now know about us, so we might as well be public, and therefore we have an obligation to make things better. You know, Michael Moran, who was Miracle Man's alter ego, has sacrificed. He's given up. So there is no other alter ego. There is just Miracle Man. So they're now going to sort of take on this mantle of like living gods within society, and to do so, they are going to sort of like reorganize society, and it starts. In six, well, no, it's a single page for me, and it's so you get this like beautiful, you know, soliloquy of introduction of what he's doing around this place, of looking at these things and all this other stuff, and they go to this funeral, and then it's like, oh, and then we had the meeting with the government, and basically it's sort of like Miracle Man giving a sort of a PowerPoint presentation on all the stuff he's going to do. And we're going to do this and this, and then we're going to reorganize the economy. And Margaret Thatcher says, and this is, I love it, no, this is all quite preposterous. We can never allow this kind of interference with the market. And all Miracle Man says is, allow? and you just see, and it's this acknowledgement that she knows there's nothing you can do, and it breaks Margaret Thatcher, and I'm sure Alan Moore really enjoyed depicting that. But
and
the point-
rightfully so.
yeah, but I also love that within that he gets chastised for it as well. Miracle Woman comes to him and she says, like, that was childish. We're better than that. We are supposed to be above pettiness. And so I love the fact this one page is like, we now know what you're going to do, but we are going to do this in the way that, we are not going to belittle people. We're not going to look down on people, but we are going to force our hand. And that's what the rest of the book is. And it's such a good page. It's so well done and so well sort of, I just love that page. And it's so brilliant. And then obviously it goes on to the rest of the book. But yeah, I just want to sort of start from there, really. What were your thoughts?
Well, I mean, that is a great page. And the idea, as Miracle Man watches Thatcher leave, he narrates, walking away, she looked so old, so suddenly. I could not hate her. And it's this relief. Like, if I were granted Superman's powers, it would be a lot easier to look at, say, Donald Trump and say, what a broken man destroyed by his father, right? I mean, what a bundle of neuroses. How sad it must be to be him. It's hard. I can let go of the anger. I can let go of what I feel about it. And it's easier when you're a god to do that. I really love the utopianism of this issue, and utopias and their discontents is one of my favorite subjects. In fact, I wrote a master's thesis about it in Milton. And it sort of here it comes from the place of that observation about, for example, the Fantastic Four. So, well, you've got all this technology. Why are people still dying of cancer? You can go through a multiverse and shrink people down and cure all these things. I mean, Wonder Woman's got the purple ray. It just magically cures everything. Excuse me, over here with a terminal disease, Wonder Woman, could you, Themyscirans, maybe give a shit about us a little? And that's always the thing that nobody dares tackle. Even today, nobody dares tackle it. Mark Waid and his Fantastic Four run uses it, but only really so that the money from those patents funds the Fantastic Four. But you don't see on the ground how this would fundamentally change reality live for people, because you can't do that, right? I mean, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is finding this out, that it's now at the point where nothing should resemble the world that we know it in.
We should all be living in Wakanda by this point in the MCU.
Yeah, and even Wakanda makes no sense whatsoever. But I mean, like, the years of trauma of, like, everyone disappears for 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the entire timeline of this universe, you can't talk about a terrorist without, well, what did they do for those 5 years? How did they interpret it? How did they understand Thor? How do they, if they're religious? So if you run a superhero narrative forward enough, time has to deform. Yeah. And that is, Watchmen does that. But at the end of Watchmen, it's more controlled, as symbolized by that 9-panel grid. And at the end, okay, so half of New York has died, but what's really happened, right? We're still in a kind of superhero status quo. And in fact, restoring that was Ozymandias' point, right? Prevent nuclear war. Here, Alan Moore just says, all of that stuff that nobody dares touch, we're going to do all of that because I can. This was always where it was going to go. This is the logical conclusion that nobody's dared write for Superman. Nobody has dared write for any of this. And we're going to do it this beautifully with those moments that you're describing with Thatcher, with those beautiful human poetic moments.
Yeah, they do, because they continue. There's some great panels, but you say, but it's a utopian future, it's a utopian view, and it is it is for the most part. because what I love about this isn't that sort of it's sort of like Miracle Man and his crew sort of like, firstly, like they get rid of all the nuclear warheads, they teleport them to the sun, and then they do this, and then they do that, and the world is wonderful. Like, they do all this stuff, and you see that it actually makes sense. There's a great speech about why money doesn't exist, why money is imagined. It never really exists. And you can see there's like pictures of people crying, like these rich people are like, oh Christ, what's going on? And then it goes on about education and the fact that, like, well, crime is clearly fueled by drugs. And so, we got rid of money. And so we provided everybody with everything they needed. I love this. There's a moment where it's like, well, we provided you with this. Again, it comes out to that Maslow's hierarchy. We are going to provide you with this. If you want anything above that, then yeah, you're going to work for it. That's fine. That's your level. That's like the universal income, but it's going to be quite a good one.
Right.
So once we've got that, people are all satisfied. Well, weirdly, crime decreased. And so did dependence on drugs. So we thought, well, we're going to make them all drugs are now readily available and legal, but we're also going to provide a total education about them as well, both the good and the bad. Well, that's when the cartels collapsed, and it sort of goes through all this stuff. And it leads to Charles Manson running basically a kids' school. And it's like, and there's a great comment, which is sort of, I don't know if you can get away with now, but it's a Charles Manson runs a care group now for infants that have been abused. Though he still finds black children harder to relate to, he perceives his problem, working hard to counter it. And it's this moment of like, everyone now we have now sort of given people enough that they aren't just sort of struggling at the bottom. They are now able to reflect. Even like Charles Manson is now able to reflect on why he is the way he is, and is able to be a positive contribution to society. But you do get things, and there's a great one where they're like, people are still shits about, you have sort of survivalists, religious groups that sort of sit outside of society. And this is the moment. This is the one I wasn't sure about. I'm just going to sort of see this one. So they basically get rid of the nuclear power plants. And so first they've got to deal with the unions, but then they got rid of money, so it doesn't matter. But they've got this thing called Earth Firsters. And it says they maintained that Africa should starve and die, part of a natural balance, while insisting that the smallpox virus had its place in our ecology and ought to be reintroduced. Mostly Americans, Earth Firsters were still well fed and well inoculated. We ignored them and continued to repair the wounded world. Clearly some prejudices there from Mr. Moore, but I love the fact he says, well, they're all sort of like well fed and well inoculated, so it's easy for you to say this is what should happen in Africa and this is what should happen with the smallpox virus. We've eradicated it. And I love the fact that living in a pandemic world, in a post-pandemic world, these are totally the people that would be like, no, I'm protesting the fact you're making everything better. How dare you take this away from me?
Yeah, I think it's realistic that, as it says, every step of the way, there's resistance, right? And I mean, as we record this, we've just gotten out of Afghanistan. Well, people voted for this. Every president, including Bush, wanted to do this. People voted for this. Both Trump and Biden said they would do this, and now it's been done. And sure, all's fair to criticize, but you did realize that nobody withdraws from a war, that's just been lost and has it all go well, right? And again, there's plenty of things that are fair criticism, but people who voted for something then think, well, I voted for it. Now I'm going to complain that it wasn't done exactly the way I wanted, or there were consequences to what I wanted to have happen. Like, well, I voted for Trump, but I never imagined he'd try to take over the government. Really? Because he really told you so.
It was always there. It was always there. Yeah.
Right. But I mean, still people will always complain. And and that's good, and that's part of the process to a certain degree. My problem with that passage is sort of the left-right politics. I mean, I'm a vegan, I'm an environmentalist. I don't know that they are the most radical, but I mean, there are people who say things like this. I mean, there are libertarians, especially, who say aid to Africa is hurting Africa and keeping them from developing their own indigenous programs. Every time you build a well, you're hurting Africa long term. I don't believe that, but I mean, there are people who say this, and they have some data and support behind some of those points, not all of them. But and the smallpox virus is a little extreme there, but we don't know what. I mean, we're in the middle of climate change now, and we've lost so many species. We don't even know what's going to happen to the food web as these species collapse. So, I mean, the idea that like the smallpox virus has, the idea here isn't that it has full civil rights, but that it has its place in our ecology.
Yes.
Is the phrase. Okay. So, I mean, this is a little bit of a stereotype of the left. And I think that that's also important to have in here because Thatcher's in here, right? I mean, You've got to have a little bit of balance and realize, of course, there are crazies on the left, and you and I both know that too.
Yeah, and Moore, like you said, the thing I like about this is Moore's not willing to back down. Like he is, he is going to sort of like poke at everybody, but do it in a like you say, it's not just poking it for poking's fun. Mm-hmm. He's not just doing it to be the grumpy old man that he sort of is often depicted as. Like, it's all fully justified, and when you read it, you're like, no, this is pretty much what would happen. Like, you would have this colossal event, this epoch-changing sort of like event of these beings coming onto Earth and saying like, no, we're doing this for your betterment, and you can't stop us.
And good for them.
Yeah,
I mean. And there's no way to reread what I love about revisionism, and people never acknowledge this, is there's no way to reread those dumb superhero stories in the same way after. You can't go back to Superman beating Lex Luthor as he robs a bank after you've read Watchmen, right? There's right after the sort of irrigation of Africa sequence is they say, transporting ozone from a lifeless gas giant, we renewed the stratosphere and thinned the smog that trapped Earth's heat, endangering her ice caps. These were but the simplest tasks included in our labors. I mean, like, remember Firestorm? Firestorm transmutes elements, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, so, in Swamp Thing by Moore, there's this line about, do you know how many atoms are in the atmosphere?
Yeah.
I can count them, says Superman, being imposing and terrifyingly powerful and scary. But the point is, superheroes could do these things. And every time we get a story, it's some kind of like half-assed Superman decides to irrigate Africa. And then the moral of the story is, I've got to let these humans do it for themselves. Really? Have you looked at our international politics lately? Just do it for us because we suck beyond belief.
It's that thing of sort of... Yeah, exactly. It's that thing of, I hate that. I hate that thing of, no, we are here. We have to let the humans find their own way. It's like, really? Do you know our history? Because our own way usually leads to self-destruction. We can't seem to stop ourselves. We're that bad at it. We need to be guided.
I'm all for letting humans find their own way, but if you watch two children attacking each other with knives and you're like, I'm really sick of children killing each other with knives. Maybe I should do something. No, I need to just watch them stab each other and die.
Well, they call that out.
What is the benefit of this?
They call that out in the issue because he says that because they get a load of hate mail. They are literally getting, they call them verbal warheads because that's all they've got left. And he says, like, the conservative media seem to think that that the world has fallen into the hands of the super liberals. Meanwhile, the liberal press says we're interfering with human destiny to take away their free will. And I forget the character's name, but the sort of the black guy they've got with the firepower. He says, bullshit. You see some little kid just about to drink Clorox. You're going to take away her free will, or you're not going to get any destiny. Yeah, like. So even Alan Moore recognizes this idea of like, no, look, we aren't this clanism, this sort of this segregation that we're introducing is tearing us apart, and we're being stupid about it, and we are acting like children. So yeah, he is, and this book in and of itself could be a manifesto. Like you could take this and be like, this is what we're going to do. Like it would never happen because the elite. You would need Miracle Man to enforce this, but yeah, one of the things I do find fascinating, I'm going to throw this as the next thing, is actually, before I get to that, there are two other things I want to sort of raise. Is about the post the post success of what they're doing. So you start to get some inclination of what happens after. You get the good and the bad. I love the fact that this is such like an 80s thing, really, is because there's no point in space travel anymore, or they're doing, or that's becoming incredibly easy. So they've now got the psychonauts, which is a term that I love. So you've got people that are basically taking psychedelic drugs to explore the inner sort of mind and this sort of psychedelia of sort of this psychedelic exploration. It basically like kids now want to become spacemen, which is what they're called.
Yeah.
And I love that as a little nod. Like now we're able to we're actually using these people that are addicted to drugs or that have this dependency or have this inclination, and we're now using them for this purpose as well. Like nobody goes wasted. But I also like the little joke that they are the spacemen. But the thing I wanted to mention was the return of Miracle Man's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Is a wonderful scene because you have Miracle Man because she's second generation miracle person.
Yes. Yeah.
And so like even in that, like, you see there's a weakness, there's a sort of a vulnerability in Miracle Man because he sort of she comes back and they're talking about stuff. And she's like, yeah, I went to this planet and, they sort of put their sort of intelligence into these sort of sex robots. And I tried it for a while, but it wasn't for me. And he's like, you're 4. What? And then she describes what they have done as redecorating. And he's like, what do you mean redecorating? Like, you pretentious little shit. Like, I kind of love that. I just like this relationship and this discussion that they have.
Yeah, and then it ends with her saying, "You decided to leave the sky that color, did you?"
Yeah.
I mean, so this thing in Miracle Man that's so interesting is that Miracle Man is the closest to Mike Moran, the human, right? Miracle Woman was abused as part of her origin, and she was, even in her introduction, she was much more sexually free, right? So I mean, there are problems if you want to criticize her portrayal. She's portrayed as this kind of sexual object to a certain degree, but she certainly has agency. But anyway, she's not a Puritan about sex, and she's not as puritanical and not as in love with these human notions. So his reaction to his daughter having sex is you're only 4, is this sort of dumb human vestige that has no bearing on this world of gods. How are you applying this? This is really just the vestiges of your dumb moral human puritanism. And she's not constrained by that. And Miracle Woman is less constrained by that. And I think that it's interesting because Miracle Man runs this utopia and he creates this utopia. And it makes sense that the person who cares most about humans would want to really do a good job for them. And there's this line where Miracle Woman says, you're still so attached to these humans. They're more like animals compared to us. And she is correct. There's not really much point in arguing about, do we argue about free will when it comes to our dogs? No, you don't say, I need your affirmative consent to take you to the vet. No, we're going to take you to the vet. Here's the food I'm going to give you because it's what's good for you. The doctor said so. So I love that there's this gradation of, as you said, from Miracle Man to the sort of second generation. and to the real aliens like the Warsmiths.
Yeah, it just stands out really well, and I think it's like I say, it's this great notion of to like who he was, because he still tries to sort of connect to his ex-wife, Liz, and she really sort of says like basically like get out, like you, and she has a really good line because he's trying to they can now have their own, everyone can have their miracle bodies, like they can do this thing. And he says to her, look, come on, you don't understand what you're turning down. And she says, no, you've forgotten what you're giving up. And so there is this idea of sort of he has, in doing all this stuff, all this fantastic stuff, like he is a god. I mean, that's a turning point, really. That conversation is a turning point in the book. Is that thing of like, well, you've lost your humanity, not in a bad way. Not that you haven't lost your sort of like your goodness, but you've lost the connection from the human experience. You are now separate from us. So don't try and come and tell me that what I can have, because, there's two sides to this coin. Like, Michael Moran was a man. He had a history. He had a life, and that's gone to be replaced by you. And I find that really interesting as well, that there is this thing, this acknowledgement of like, no, being human's not all bad. Trying to keep telling us we could be as good as you as the gods. It's sort of a, it's I don't know. There's just something there for me that's like, don't keep telling us how crap we are.
Yeah, I've always struggled with this sequence. I've always struggled with it. I've struggled with, and it's this question that lingers at the end of this issue as Miracle Man sits at the top of Olympus, this wonderful structure that's been built in the remains of London, to give the gods a home. And he is wondering about, including why Liz said no. I wonder about that. I mean, to me, I think this is a world of opportunity. Yes, you're losing your money, you're losing or whatever you think is valuable, but you're gaining these other things, and this is the world now, and it's a lot better than what we had before. Get with the program. Again, why are you attached to these dumb human notions like free will, which is a stupid concept to begin with, but certainly is an abstract one that matters less than, kids having food and things like that, let alone us having superhuman bodies. I want one. So I sort of struggle with this. I think that what I don't struggle with is I don't struggle with the overall arc of their relationship. And when Miracle Man starts, Mike Moran is a sort of photographer for a newspaper, and he's sort of feels emasculated by the fact that his wife makes more money, or his other makes more money than he does, and then he becomes Miracle Man, and Miracle Man is so powerful. Meanwhile, Mike Moran is like, okay, I got to take out the trash again. I can't do any of these things. You love sex with my alter ego, with Shazam, but I'm a kid. Like what. I'm inferior. And so Mike Moran still struggles. And the end of that arc comes, I think, in 14, just before that climax, as Mike Moran, has been injured. His injuries don't heal. And he goes into the mountains and he writes a suicide note and says Kimota, and transforms into Miracle Man, and Miracle Man materializes and then reads this note that basically says, yeah, don't ever summon me back again.
Yeah.
And that's heartbreakingly sad, but I think it is correct, right? I mean, that person who, unless they become a supervillain, essentially they have to give up and say, yeah, no, this is your world now. There's not really a lot of point to me being around.
He serves no purpose, The one thing.
So Liz is like attached to Mike Moran, and she, here Miracle Man sort of over it, and she's like, "Oh, you're screwing Miracle Woman," and he's like, "Yeah, look, I'm not as sexually liberated as her, but it's sex. We're gods. Well, what do you want? I still love you. I'm at your house. I'll bump you up in this program. You'll get a miracle body." And she still says no. Why? It's just like. You say something's been lost, but what's been lost?
To me, the thing is, it's almost like there's a trauma there that she hasn't had, and she can't talk to anyone about it. Like, her experience of this is different to everybody else's. I mean, there will be people. One of the things I think that's not addressed in this book, which I was going to mention later on, but is the people that are impacted by the fight. That I think would be mentioned today.
Mhm.
So there's people that like survived, that will have lost limbs, will have lost loved ones, will have lost their house and all this other stuff. And I'm sure Miracle Man has rehoused them and all this other stuff. But like, there's a trauma to having lived through that fight. There'd be a resentment. Like, yeah, he's giving you all this stuff, but yeah, but I still saw him pick up a car with a family in it and trounce it into the side of Kid Miracle Man. Like, I saw the carnage. I'm completely, warped by that. But for Liz as well, the thing we forget is we just talked about Miracle Man's daughter. It's also Liz's daughter.
Right.
And so when she says what you've lost, yeah, you had a child that became more ethereal and basically more intelligent than you by the age of 4, by the age of 5, actually, in this case. So she's had this experience of having her husband and her daughter leave her and be, elevated above what she can ever achieve.
Mhm.
And so I think, to me, I there's a part of me that takes that conversation as almost like petulance, as sort of like, you don't know what you've left behind. I don't want what you've got. I'm going to cling to this because I've already lost every. You took away my child. You took away my husband.
Mhm.
I'm clinging to this because it's the only thing I've got. And I think there's a part of that, and so I understand her grief in that sense. That's sort of how I read that scene, and the fact he can't understand it validates the fact that he has distanced himself from the human experience. He's going, look, I'm trying to give you something cool. Like, it's almost like, look, I can give you a brand new car and all this other stuff. Just look, you're not listening. You're not thinking about everything that we've gone through together. To then come and live with you in this mountain, this Olympus, is too much. So
Right.
I think she struggles to articulate that.
I think yeah, and I think more could do more there in terms of that psychology. I think you're right that there's a kind of petulance to it, and of course you're absolutely right about sort of like, you've taken my husband away, you've taken my daughter away. Here is, and this is, I mean, the other thing I love about this whole series is the sense of inevitability. This is where every superhero story is going in one way or another, is to issue 15 or 16. Do you dare go there? And what is your take on it? Those are the only questions. If you don't even get there, all right, well, maybe you're a fun little romp, but, you're certainly not adding anything. And in the same way, when her husband turns into a superhero, it's great. She, is dating this man who's sparkling and magnificent and godly. And, this is where it would end up. Yeah. Superman is not gonna, it's like, yeah, he might love Lois Lane, but he is going to, have some birthing matrix that's gonna pop out his Kryptonian, pure-blooded babies. He's gonna have God all over the universe, and he's gonna be like, yeah, you understand, this is my species, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is more important. I'm so sorry that I'm offending you by keeping the Kryptonian race alive. I mean, I'm being a bit mean, and Superman would no doubt be nicer than that. But I mean, inevitably, you're going to be alienated from that person, from that amazing opportunity, to be with that person. And so it feels right, but it also I think cements this idea of humans are difficult, and there's always going to be a complaint. Nobody is going to be
happy.
Just say, thank you for this utopia. It's all good.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing. Like, they completely. The other thing I think more gets that, because the other thing is they understand about what people are, and so what Miracle Man and his sort of posse do is they take on these sort of like archetypal roles as well, because people, it gives the human race something to sort of like a point of reference. Like, okay, we are going to use mythological archetypes to to ground this so that, weirdly, to give people an understanding and a framework with which to understand this. So Avril, the black guy, takes on the aspect of so Avril, sorry, that's the miracle woman, takes on the role of Aphrodite. I don't know his name now. Huey Moon took charge of meeting the Earth's needs, so he becomes like the Earth god.
Like the fire starter character.
Yes, yeah. Mors becomes like Hades and so on and so forth, and then sort of like British Bulldog, the British Bulldog, who was Big Ben, becomes like this Hercules kind of figure, sort of, half god, half human, even having a bulldog sort of on his head, which is hilarious. And they fit into these archetypal roles, and I like the fact that, like, well, yeah, for us to fit into this, there has to be a mythology around us, and that's probably going to be written in some cases by the people below us, and it'd probably be false in some cases, but that's going to be the case. So yeah, well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's amazing how much more puts into these 32 pages and how much he thinks about all of those things. Both of us are fans of the Neil Gaiman run that follows, and it is astounding how everything in that first golden age comes out of this and comes out of those ideas that in some cases are just a few panels. As for example, Miracle Woman as Aphrodite sets people up and basically runs a matchmaking service. It's like, people are lonely. We're gods. We're able to really find people who are compatible for them. This is a phenomenal service. I think that the whole pantheon thing is the title of the issue, but it's also the theme that runs throughout this book 3, right? As they achieve godhood status. And I think, provides a lot of sort of epic resonance. Some of it works better than others. I think Mors and Hades, reviving Andy Warhol is great. And, that whole sequence is great. I think the Aphrodite thing is great. I don't know that they have to make themselves into these versions of, gods that people can relate to. But, it works for me. Does it hang you up?
No, I love it. I think it works really well. I think it would be something that you do. You get, if you, especially sort of, it seems to happen almost naturally. Like, at no point do they actually say we had a meeting and we decided to take on these roles. It sort of just happens, and people sort of fit them into these roles. And I kind of like that. And I do like the Andy Warhol thing. It leads to one of my favorite issues of Neil Gaiman's run. So yeah, no, I think it works well. I love this idea that they're like, no, we took on these roles. It allowed us to sort of to move within this sort of framework and stuff. And so, because it's called Olympus, like, as you said, they are literally building the mountain of the gods. So I do like that. Something I like less, which I struggled with, and there are very few things I would nitpick about this issue because it is absolutely fantastic, and that's actually at the very beginning. So I've got the re-release from 2015, so I assume it was in the others. It says it's been 5 years since my rebirth, though I'd suspected that the people would in some way mark the anniversary. I'd hoped rather uncharitably they would not see fit to sacrifice small goats to children in my name, or It's then so as it transpired, I was quite touched. They made a bonfire on the wasteland that was once Trafalgar Square, and on it heaped their comic books, their films and novels filled with horror, science fiction, fantasy, and as it burned, they cheered as the curling, burning pages fluted up into the night, cheered to be done with the times when wonder was a sad and wretched thing made only out of paper, out of celluloid. And there's a part of me that thinks, like, you're writing this in a comic.
Mm-hmm.
And even after knowing what people are like, people are people, even after this happening, I think you would probably have more science fiction and fantasy and stuff, because people would be like, well, if this is possible, then we can do other things. And you'd have fan fiction about, you definitely have slash fiction about some of these characters. So I don't know, but it almost feels like there's I don't know. I sort of know what Moore's trying to do, but it just that paragraph irks me.
Yeah, well, I think the burning of books is very dystopian and it's arresting. It's always arresting in anything. And I think it hints right away at that dystopian edge that's always there to any utopian prospect, and that Moore in this issue is very aware of. Having said that, I do love that idea of sort of we don't need these anymore. But I'll get back to that in a second. But I know what you mean about, practically speaking, that people would still write fiction about superheroes, if anything more, And the Apocrypha miniseries that takes place between Gaiman's Golden Age and Silver Age is framed about that. I mean, it's Miracle Man reading comics about him and his pantheon, and then critiquing them at the end of the issue after he's read them. It's wonderful. But I know what you mean. The sort of same thing happens in Watchmen, that because there are real superheroes, Moore imagines that wouldn't be interesting, and that we'd have a comic industry dominated by pirates, which is also sort of thumb in the eye at the one genre industry, but isn't necessarily realistic. As you say, if Dr. Manhattan is real, if Miracle Man's real, you'd have more fiction about them.
Well, the only thing I would say is, when we were during the space race and we were planning to go to the moon and we made it to the moon, we got more science fiction, and we in fact, science fiction and space fiction became mainstream in many cases. So that's sort of how I see it. I think Moore sees things in a slightly more cynical way, I think, than I think is justifiable in this. But yeah.
I mean, but I do love this idea of sort of what are superheroes stories doing, because this is a comic that sort of takes the idea of the superhero to the nth degree, right? To the inevitable conclusion, and spends at least 34 pages exploring that. But it also dares to get at, what is it that appeals to us about these fantasies in the first place, right? That the world is so flawed. It's a relief to go to a cinema and watch whatever, right? Spider-Man swinging around, right? And somebody who believes in truth and honor, and people going on, Indiana Jones-like adventures and finding lost cities, and, this joyous world of fantasy and wonder, while we live in squalor and disappointment. And of course, that's not reality. The world isn't all bad. But in that sort of paradigm, this issue both begins and ends with a refrain. Again, so literary. Right after what you read is this description of how flawed that old world was, using the repeated phrase, "I dream." I dream of cities that old futurists would weep with joy to see, of wharfside neighborhoods where tough kids track down spies, where crumbling tenements contort to teetering and eccentric shapes that seem to spell out words against the night. And we all know that's Newsboy Legion. That's the spirit, I mean, we all we all know these references. And it seems, Miracle Man has been informed by comics, right? Gargunza, who made him, was informed by comics in these dumb stories, and made this dumb fantasy world for them to inhabit that resembles the comics of old. And at the end, Miracle Man is talking not about what he dreams of, but rather what he's at this point built. And the refrain is, look up, and look what humanity can do and can achieve. And here, of course, it's been done from outside. This is, in some sense, the opposite of an Enlightenment idea, that we have to manage our world, stop looking to gods. No, here God's real, right? Thor's real. He should be doing this. We can't look to a god because he's outside our window, right? He's not. I don't have to diagram purgatory and heaven and hell from Dante to locate God. He's He's outside. He'd like to meet you. And so, in some sense, I'm troubled by that. But, whether this is ultimately a positive statement in that sense, but it does bring that pain that I think, for me, going back to Flash #1, to tie it all together, I was a messed up kid. I mean, I was in a sort of, loving but abusive household, and, felt incredibly alienated and alone. And I was able to retreat into this, not retreat, but to live in this fantasy world of comics and superheroes and science fiction and all of this. And that was therapeutic for me. But the pain of that is that was so appealing because I was in so much pain. It was wonderful because the world I lived in was not so great in a lot of ways. And I really hated myself and felt uncool and felt, was bullied and being smart and weird was never going to lead to a good life in, southern rural Illinois. And so I think that pain comes out in both the sort of I dream of, and that gulf between reality and these comics, and also, sort of look up and that pain of, maybe we can't as humans make Olympus and make Miracle Man a reality, but we can make a lot of these things actually happen with the economy and things like this. There's a lot that we can do and we can fix, and we choose not to do it. We manifestly choose not to give a shit.
Yeah, no, I agree. Those pages when they have those monologues around this thing of like, no, you look, like you said, the money doesn't work, doesn't exist. Drugs are clearly there's a root here. There's a knock-on effect. There's a ripple effect for all of this. Change this one thing, and you can change everything else. And I find that fascinating, and it more really is. For firing on all cylinders in this case. I mean, this is one of the things, and we'll finish on this before we move on to the final book. But you and I have said this before because we've talked about Miracle Man before, and the fact of the matter is that Alan Moore is one of my favorite writers. I really like his Swamp Thing. I do like Watchmen. I like there's other bits and pieces that he's done. From Hell is fantastic. But for weirdly, like as a piece of, as it's a literary comic, and as an inevitable conclusion told within a 3-book series, Miracle Man to me is possibly his best work. And I know there are people that have picked it up recently and have sort of worked through it and stuff, and it's one of those that sort of like, it still baffles me why this never gets, they talk about sort of like best comic runs or better than, like, why is Miracle Man never on these bastard lists? Because like it baffles me.
I don't know, but the stuff that is often flabbergasting, and I'll read like top 10 comics. Good luck. I mean, I'm sorry if people like it, but good luck reading Hickman's X-Men stuff. I mean, it's filled with ideas. I have no idea, it's filled with good sequences that don't connect. Yeah. And that's good. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is, not good that somehow gets praised. Not that there isn't a tremendous amount of good stuff being done, but yeah, you're right. Miracle Man isn't paid enough attention. I do feel bad for not including like Grant Morrison. I've been so influenced by Grant Morrison. I do feel bad for not including a billion things on the list, right? The last issue of Doom Patrol. But I thought, okay, if I'm on a desert island, do I want to read the last issue of Doom Patrol and a story about suicide over and over again? Probably not. I'm prone to suicidal thinking anyway. I probably don't need that pounded into my head on a desert island. Whereas with this, not only because I've read Gaiman, I think that every page in this seems to suggest a whole other story, right? Yes. And I want to write those stories. It sends your mind off spiraling into these sublime sort of thoughts and cubby holes of possible stories and histories, alternate histories, and it's delightful in that way, and benefits repeat reading. So I thought, okay, Miracle Man should get more attention, and
Yes.
I'm willing to take it to my desert island to reread this issue.
And it is fantastic. And if anything, like reading this, I'm like, oh yeah, I haven't read it for like at least 18 months to 2 years. I think I need to pull it out again and read this again. And we are supposed to be getting, Gaiman has written it. It's being drawn. So please, Marvel, pull your flipping finger out and give us the continuation.
It's not at all clear what's going on there, and we keep reading like the first several issues are drawn and done, and how the workflow is working, and then it doesn't appear. I remember doing when we did that Miracle Man. What year was that? That Miracle Man episode?
About 2 years. Yeah, it's about probably 18 months ago, 2 years ago, something like that.
Okay, and you said, well, I read it. It's coming out later this year, and I thought, I've sort of read that a lot before.
Yeah.
So I mean, part of the problem is this is fantastic work, and I don't know that it's not selling compared to, Wolverine has magic teleportation powers or whatever the fuck they're doing now, and is dying for the 4th time. Who the fuck knows, and who the fuck cares? So, all right, I'm a bitter old man.
But no, we are both in the pitch that if you're not reading Miracle Man, you should have read Miracle Man. But let's move on to the final book then.
Finally, to a good writer.
Yeah, this book, Bitter Old Man Writes Comics, I think. But we have got. Oh Christ! I'm going to try to pull up. There you go. So Kimot Ren, number 5, written by yourself, Julian, drawn by Andre Cigar. Actually, do you know what? You tell me, because I'm not pronouncing some of these names.
Okay, I don't know that I've asked it. I always pronounce it Andre Surigar. He's Indonesian.
He's good. The art in this is great. So give me so Kimot Ren. I will give my thing, having read it this afternoon, and then we will sort of look at some more. But basically, Kimot is a robot that is from the Mars Society, and I'm unsure how, but is basically now part of a troupe of, I hate to use the word, but freaks, circus freaks. And the issue opens with the conjoined twins. One of the conjoined twins, a yin and yang situation where one of the twins dies, and the other one sort of is still alive. And Kimot sort of offers and says, well, I may have the skills to separate them and actually save one of them. And they make the choice of no, it's not up to us, it's up to her whether she wants to be separated. And then there was this basically sort of dialogue around understanding what death is and why you would make these choices, and then this idea of being close to God. And it's fantastic. I'm going to try not to praise you too much. I don't want to be,
Don't hold back. The audience needs to hear, the truth. You deserve to get. They deserve that from you, my friend.
This idea of this artificial intelligence, this robot that exists, it's not even a robot, sorry, it is just an AI that is basically built just to think. And it gets to a point where even to communicate with it extensively, like is impossible now, because it has gone beyond these things. You would need, as it says, basically you would need categories of knowledge that are so far out of our sort of remit at the moment that like you couldn't communicate with this thing anymore. And even like small things, like it just tells us like, oh yeah, just build this structure, build these structures, and just don't ask, just build them. And it basically reorganizes the way that the society works, and then has a ripple effect and this other stuff. And then they can connect with it. And this is the other thing, this idea of being able to connect with a living God, I found really interesting. But it's this idea of also this idea of acceptance of death. Of, well, yeah, you can connect. This is what I talk about. You can connect with your living God, or you have this experience of connecting with your living God. We don't have that, as I assume it's obviously a Christian belief system. But we have faith, and we believe this sort of thing, and we celebrate people for this. So it's a touching issue, and I do like the ideas in it. But yeah, that's sort of that's sort of it in a nutshell. It ends with the funeral of Daisy and Dottie, the sort of the twins. But yeah, first off, tell me about Kimot Ren. So who is Kimot Ren?
Well, like you said, I mean, he's an alien from from Mars, from
Yeah.
the whole larger Martian universe that I've created with Martian comics and whatnot. And this was the first spin-off title to Martian comics. It opens with an action sequence of sort of mutiny on a flying saucer, and then him rescuing his master from the flying saucer in an upside down sequence. And I'm being really ambitious, and eventually he gets picked up by this traveling freak show, if you will, and then he gets integrated with it. And the idea of the comic is sort of it's like the last thing that you'd want to do with an alien android in the Old West, right? I mean, it's about this outsider finding community with this other group of outsiders, all of whom are lying to the public in their presentations, but are also to some degree, lying to each other and to themselves. But who have to sort of present a certain face to the public. Many of them are not really what they pretend to be, right? So, like, Michael Michelle is not, in fact, a hermaphrodite. This was what they did in these shows, is they would present things. Violet Chintana is not really from Africa, impersonating a tribeswoman on stage. And so this way in which not just outsiders, but everybody has to present this socially acceptable face, and these realms of society in which certain things are acceptable that would not be acceptable anywhere else, right? You can be celebrated for being, having no arms on stage in this context. You can't control how you're celebrated for that. And I think that, as somebody who has always felt as an outsider, this idea of how we sublimate those feelings, how we find ways to adapt to society, ways to be praised, ideally, successful, ideally, for those same things that make us forever separate and struggling. It touches me deeply. And so Kimot Ren at this point is officially what he's doing is he's been told to blend in because he can't reveal that there's a civilization on Mars, right? But he's been caught, so they think he's an automaton built by some eccentric, person, and sort of integrate him with the show. And so he looks more primitive on stage than he does in this issue, right? They actually make him put these like kind of steam pumps on him, because people won't believe it if it's a real thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like we have to give a presentation of us that is dumber than we really are. And I think I certainly identify with that. I mean, half of, the intelligent women I've known have had to do that just to get by. So yeah, and Kimot Ren at this point is still following that sort of blending in thing, and but you realize faster than he does that he really has come to care for, and this isn't just like what he's doing to bide his time because he's on a mission. He has come to care for these people.
Yeah, and it starts to show in this issue. I mean, like say his first instinct. There's a human response from the people around them when Daisy's died, but his response is sort of like, well, no, I can help her live. It's sort of, and it seems that his response is sort of almost robotic, and but I like the fact he acknowledges a lot of this stuff. There's no sort of, what you've done is you haven't gone down the data route or like the typical Star Trek, even like Red Dwarf made fun of it, like is this the emotion we call friendship? There's none of that. It's like he is quite logical, but he's still sort of like, well, no, I could save her. Like their circulatory system are limited. Daisy is almost certainly going to die. I believe I could save her. And so the confusion is, why aren't you letting me?
Mm-hmm.
And but at no point does he enforce. I'm sure he could have been an android. He could probably enforce it, but he never does. And so there becomes this discussion about, even if you did, save her, like you're sort of not, because since birth they have had this. They have been in, for want of a better phrase, been in each other's face their entire lives, and then to not have that, could be too much. She's not just grieving for her sibling; she's grieving for her way of life, or she's terrified of this new life that we face. So, I found that all really interesting. That there's this idea, this notion of like, no, it's not just about saving her; it's about like saving her might not be the most merciful thing.
Mm-hmm.
The trauma could be too much, in the long run. So,
yeah. Well, I mean, for me, this is also a metaphor for imagining somebody else's experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you and I are white dudes, right?
Yeah.
Women who were assigned women at birth have a different biology that goes through processes that we do not go through, and that we have to imagine and try to understand, but that are not innate, and that changes your point of view. And in reverse the reverse is true too. And I think that it can be difficult to understand somebody else's experience. And I think that is also the title of this is, I think, ambitious. We are all connected. A philosophical statement, and risks using that metaphor of the Siamese twins. For this desire to help, to be connected with others, and the ways in which all of us. I mean, it seems to me the central thing about being alive is that we don't know anybody else's experience. We have this headspace that nobody really knows. We can articulate our suffering. Nobody knows if we're exaggerating, how much we're hiding. We cannot ever communicate to somebody else what it's like to be us. And at the same time, we crave that connection, and we crave that connection to others. And we can try to imagine and construct a sort of mock-up in our heads of what it's like, inside Scott's brain.
Mm-hmm.
But all I ever see is just the tip of the iceberg. And I have to draw those lines down to imagine what the rest of that iceberg is like. But I can only see these little indications, these little suggestions. And that, to me, is such a central part of being alive. It's one of the reasons why I like transgressive literature, which this is not. But that's always fascinated by this desire to connect to others, and this inability to fully do so.
No, I like that, and I agree with that. Like you said, this idea of sort of individual experiences, and I say that thing of trying to see things from another person's point of view. One of the things my dad used to say to me quite a lot when I was a kid was, especially more so when I was becoming an adolescent, was like, there's no point in getting annoyed with some people because they're all on a journey. You don't know what that journey is, like what's brought them to this point. They don't know what your journey is that's brought you to this point either. And they are very, very different, and they're going to be fueled by different experiences and different sort of, information, but you have been brought to this point, and all you will know is what is presented to you, but you will never know what that full journey is. And you've got to understand that like, you cannot ever know that. But like you say, which makes it hard to see things from other people's experiences or from other people's points of view, because from what sometimes you can go, oh, like you said, you and I, two sort of like white guys with similar nerd experiences and similar sort of like but even that, more than that, I'm British, you're American. That in itself comes with cultural separation. There are different things. We were joking about this before about sort of like our school experiences. Yours was you can be anything. You can be the president of the United States. And ours in the British thing was like, you'll be lucky if you can work in the coal mine, you little bastard. So it's a different kind of experience, but that cultural has again, you go on this journey. And so I like this idea that like he then gives you, Kimot Ren actually sort of says, he gives some information. He gives this journey of his society. And again, there's parts of that he's saying like, yeah, we were built with a purpose, but then we could break our program to become sort of like to go beyond that. Some couldn't handle that. Like their journey was to sort of throw themselves off a building. They couldn't deal with this idea of being purposeless or breaking this notion. And so again, like you say about this idea of going from other people's experiences, it's not just. I like the fact that you haven't just said, yes, we are going to give you the human experience, and you don't understand what the human experience is. It flips around and says, well, actually, yeah, I come from a society too, and this is how we came about, and so you have got no point of reference for this society that I come from, where we did all this, and people worshipped a big red, like crystal thing on top of a stick.
Tunisia.
Yeah, and so I love that.
That's my complaint was, when we were reviewing Westworld season 3, I was like, hold on, they ripped off my comics, because there's this sort of geodesic dome that's a super AI.
It's got a really creepy eye as well, which was like if that was watching me, it would creep me out. But again, like I like the fact that like it's not just the human experience, which gets sort of like vaulted as being this sort of like the pinnacle of like the human experience. He's like, no, in our world, like I can basically dive into the living memories of my society by connecting to my God. And more than that, when we are about to pass, that's what we do for the final time. That's part of the ritual. Like it is alien and it is weird and all this other stuff. But it's sort of like, and I like the fact, and I miss it. I miss being a part of that world. So it shows two different experiences. Like it's easy. I know it sounds daft because there are, like you say, it's in the Wild West. It's a freak show, and so the other guy, I can't relate to how they would live, but it's a human experience. It's still a human experience. So I love the fact you have shown more than that. And actually, what's the character called who's talking to him? The black lady. What's her name?
Violet Chintana is her stage name.
Yeah. Even she, like she doesn't sort of like try and over sort of I'm trying.
She says, "I don't believe a thing you've said."
Yeah, basically, but and he says, "Good," sort of, that makes sense. He's like, "I don't know how you could. It's totally different. How could you? You've got no point of reference for this." She says, but I'm glad you told me. But she doesn't sort of shout him down. She's not like, well, you're on Earth now, and this is where, this is the way it's got to be. Well, this is a human experience. You've got to learn, come on, Crichton, you've got to learn the human way of doing things. It's none of that. It is just a sort of like, I'm sorry, I can't believe that. That's too crazy. I've got no point of reference for that. And so I do like the fact that it highlights it from both sides, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, and she boils it down to sort of like the deeper metaphor of not feeling connected, right? Of being disconnected from God and from your place, imagined or not, where you fit, where you come from. Yeah, and even earlier, she sort of challenges him and says like, you can't, he says like, well, why don't you just change, right? If she survives separate from her twin, who she's shared every moment with of her entire life, you have to adapt, and there's this sort of challenge about experience of sort of, it's easy she says it's easy for you to say, and he says, I assure you it's not.
Yeah.
Because he's, just been on a flying saucer 6 months ago or something. And she says like, yeah, you don't know where I've been, you know. And isn't I hate to. I'm really concerned about presentism. I hate when somebody makes like the full-throated feminist speech in the 1800s, you know. But you know, here is a black woman who can say, you don't know my experience.
Yeah.
And put at least this android, which, you know, that's, you know, there's all these issues with relative status, but can sort of shut that idea down. But also does it in a way that it doesn't feel to me post Me Too or something. It doesn't feel to me unrealistic or charged with some sort of line that's, you know, I think no, that's not the way it would be phrased.
Yeah, it's timeless, isn't it? I mean, you know, yeah, dialogue is dialogue. You couldn't, and this is one of the things I always find funny, you couldn't actually write dialogue from that era because people would barely be able to read it because you've got to modernize the dialogue. It's just, you know,
it's always a translation, right?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
There's a joke in an earlier issue is, you know, the most popular curse word at the time was tarnation. Well, you know, if you have people say tarnation all the time, that sounds like they sound like Yosemite Sam or something. You know, it doesn't read like, oh shit, you know, things just got real. Like you know, but it was a very puritanical, repressed society in some ways. And that was like tarnation. That's referring to God. And, you know.
Yeah, you're right. Because again, like you say, you know, you can read books from the, you know, from this period. I recently read, well, I've read a couple of things, but you know, if you read sort of like read Charles Dickens and then try and say, right, I'm going to translate that and show you a book that really shows you that dialogue, it never works. But so yeah, but like you say, but it doesn't feel, you know, you haven't taken a 21st century woman and plonked her in the Old West. It feels relatable. It still feels legit, which is, you know, important. But yeah, no, yeah, I'm going to read some more of this, and I will read some more Kimot Ren, because the thing is, like I say, I'm curious as to what's going to happen with this troop. I think, you know, it's, again, we've just read the first of a series and the last book of a series. We've read the kicking off of especially the kicking off of an era and the end of an era, really, and this one is smack in the middle. And so it's interesting to sort of see this thing of going like, oh no, this is a story in train. Like these are new experiences for the characters, and so this is still an ongoing kind of situation. And so that in itself is interesting. Like, you know, it's not. And when I've done this before, a lot of people have a tendency to pick number ones and this other stuff. And you go, but there has been a few that have gone, no, it's number, you know, picking number 11 because it's this, and you sort of go, well, I haven't read 1 to 10, so I can't get all the nuances of the issue, but there is some still really good stuff, and that's the same with this. Like, yeah, there's things in here that I don't know, there's knowledge I don't have, but I can read this and it makes total sense. But it does have this moment of like, I want to know more about, like, the one thing I'm curious about is, as you said, he's an automaton. You know, he looks different. You know, he looks a little bit like a not to be derogatory, but he's like a souped up C-3PO. But the fact of the matter is, like, these people seem to be pretty okay with him. And I'm going to be honest, in 2021, if at some point I came across a sort of an android that was able to converse with me and do these things, not sure how quickly I'd actually be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a history of automatons in this era, and of course they were not, you know, sentient speaking automatons, and they didn't look this sleek. But that is sort of highlighted when he's first introduced on stage, and it'll come back a little bit before this main storyline ends. And I know where it's going, and I have different moments in mind, but yeah, the idea is sort of that, like, I mean, there was a famous automaton who supposedly played chess, and it was basically a mannequin, and it sat at the chessboard, and in fact, there's a guy underneath in the table who's using magnets and whatnot to maneuver the board. But people believe this was real, right? So people were ready to believe, like, we're at the stage where we could do this. Same thing, New York World's Fair, right? You have that robot, and people are like, it's programmed with like a couple phrases, and it's like a scratchy record going like, hello people, and people are like, oh, it can talk. No, it's just playing, a couple phrases. But people were ready to believe, like, it's here. We're gonna have Robbie the robot tomorrow, right? Yeah. So, but I think that people have always been ready to sort of believe that, and they believe that there were automatons in ancient times too. That people were ready to believe that about, and all of them were kind of fake to one degree or another.
I love the fact that I love the fact that in a society today they say this was a sort of the Old West, or the sort of Victorian era, this era of expansion, industrialization, and invention, and even up to like well into the 20th century, there was this sort of optimistic view of robots and automatons, and sort of like, yes, we're going to have them ironing our clothes and doing all this other stuff, and like Rosie the housemaid kind of thing. And now we actually see, there was a video released recently of some robots doing parkour, jumping over boxes, running around, and everyone's like, kill it now. Like, this is it. We know what's going to happen.
James Cameron is to blame for that.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, we just did Miracle Man 16, so I mean, I just want the robots to take over, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's aliens who come here or robots, I mean, I don't trust a human as a benevolent dictator, but we obviously need one, because in the midst of climate change, we're like, how about you guys make the first move for a couple decades, and we'll see whether we feel like limping in. We're not good. We're not smart at some basic stuff. You've got people, starving under bridges, or, dying of, AIDS-infected needles, and we're still debating whether it makes sense to pass out needles and do drug treatment, because that's subsidizing addiction. And you know what? It is. It is. But so what? The alternative is paying more money to deal with, the worst problems, including their death, which ripples through the family. So what? I mean, I'm a lot less bothered by, subsidizing pregnancy by having or women by having breast pumps be paid for under Obamacare than I am the consequences of not doing that. So let's be a little practical. But we're not good at these things. So yeah, I whether it's the aliens or the robots, just let them take over already. James Cameron has just ruined things for us. No, a Terminator run reality is far better. Skynet 2024.
I welcome our robot overlords, and yeah, it's not wrong. There's an element of like logic that would be applied that would just make a lot more sense, and would make things a lot easier. Yes, I have commented on the others. Well, I didn't really comment on Miracle Man about the art, but it was good. But I will say, I sort of mentioned it, but I do want to call out on this that Andre's art on this is excellent. I really like it. Again, I have a thing about expressions in art, where as we sort of said, sometimes some people do struggle with sort of if the dialogue is telling me one thing but the facial expressions don't quite convey it, it sometimes it doesn't work. It can fall flat. But I would say sort of like he captures especially sort of the first moment when the bearded lady, I can't find her name, Betsy
Virga Fortis.
Her reaction though to the death of everything, there's a great shot. It's not the one where she's got her hands to her face. There's a panel. She's Daisy needs room. I do too. But she's got like a hand to just under her nose and stuff, and it just looks genuine. It's really well done. So I really like the art in this. in this issue as well, and the fact it travels from like the old west and some great. I mentioned before about panels with just color behind them, sort of like, there's lots of nice panels with detail and stuff behind me from the Wild West, straight to a sort of a robotic, futuristic society. So you get both. You get some good stuff in there. So great thing. And also, sorry, I'm going to call out, and I'm going to go back and find the names. Yeah, who does the colors?
Marisa Kamaputra.
Yeah,
Colors. Yeah,
I'm glad you did that. Great colors as well, absolutely fantastic. I'm learning to appreciate color artists more and more as I get older, and I think the colors in this again are fantastic. So good job all round. Well done. That sounds really patronizing. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I'm not an artist. I can do art, but I don't consider myself a visual artist. I gave that up at around 10 when I was encountering Flash. Somewhere around there, I stupidly decided I couldn't be the best writer and the best artist in the world, and I decided to focus on being the best of one.
Mm-hmm.
In a dumb linear way, like you put in your 10,000-20,000 hours, and you were like, yeah, once you're at a certain level, there's no telling like who's the best, like who's the best pianist in the world. Once you get to a certain level, it's like, no, we're all competent, and they have different strengths and weaknesses, and I know who I'm partial to. But when you're beginning, you think there's a linear thing or something. But yeah, I mean, Andre is amazing, and he's also a very kind person. And at this point, we've worked together for 6 years or something like that, and he is incredibly kind, and he is, as you see, just sort of able to illustrate anything. And I just throw this stuff at him, and I love his style. It's very realistic, but it's also very bright. And I think that a lot of what I write is really depressed and really sad. In fact, I'm toying with a future volume of Martian Comics the collections being called Depressing Space Stories, just as a sort of like Amy Mann style, like, acknowledgement of how, my stuff is kind of depressing and messed up. But all of it looks happy, under Andre's filter. It looks like this is just part of life, and it has a very different effect, and he's really quite brilliant.
Well, again, it comes to it's little things of like, taking the easy option. Like, this character dies, they're gonna have a funeral. How often have we seen funerals in the rain? Da da da. No, this is in bright sunshine, because it's actually not just it is a death, and it's tragic, and for this group, this family. But actually, like, there's an acknowledgement of like, there's that panel of like them being together. It's a celebration, and then the talk is of how wonderful these, they fought and did the stuff, but they got on really well. So, having it in broad daylight is much better. And I'm saying the colours are fantastic as well. So they work. It works as a sort of a counterpart, because there are easy options. Going, we've got to draw funeral. It's got to look depressing. I've got to convey emotion through the weather, or through the sort of like the colours have got to be drab or whatever. Like, no, they're all wearing black, but it doesn't mean the grass becomes less green, or sort of the sky becomes less blue. So,
well, also having been through death, I mean, when you watch somebody's coffin being lowered into the ground, obviously what upsets us about death is the finality and the fact that we're not going to speak to this person again. And people can claim that they believe in a wonderful afterlife, but, not really, or you wouldn't really be crying and saying, I'm not going to, you should be happy. They're in heaven, if that's what you believe. That aside, I think the most amazing thing about death is just how matter of fact it is. And I think that seeing it on that sunny day, and the way you take the time to really watch her be put in the ground, and you take that time to linger on those moments, and just one thing after another, where it's not just, you could do this in one panel and just have a caption like, the burial, sort of end of Royal Tenenbaums, like the burial occurred on this date, and and then we let. But it's that finality, it's those details, and just I think that Sunshine is, you're right that it can be read as happy. It's also just sort of matter of fact. We don't need the whole universe responding to this death. Sometimes it is what it is, and what it is so to stare at death in the face is so horrible and final and sad, and at the same time that's all any of us have. Well, we all just get a life, and end it on our terms.
Yeah, and but like I say, in a comic, let the characters convey that. Let's look at it in that way. So it's good. It's really good. I really enjoyed it. But anyway, any final thoughts on you want to sort of anything you want to highlight about Kimot Ren or any of the other issues before we start?
Well, besides, everybody should go out and buy everything Martian Lit publishes. I like the fact that I'm able to get into a little atheist jibe here, without it being wrong for the plot, right? And that other characters' religion is respected, but there's this description of what, and I did a lot of research into conjoined twins and various stories about them, and it really was common for people to say this was a curse from God, and to make money by exhibiting these children and sell them. They were abused and all of this, and Violet Chintana tells this story, and Kimot Ren is just sort of standing there, and she says, "What are you thinking?" And he says, I think matter of factly, with this sort of like absolute honesty of an alien, I think any set of beliefs that spurs a mother to treat her own daughter that way isn't evil. Is that not obvious? I think about this so often. Not that I do think there are plenty of good things that come out of religion too, but I think that sometimes we forgive the bad things, and I like to imagine a world in which we feel more connected, and we know that we are connected to each other's suffering, and that it's not that the suffering of my neighbor necessarily diminishes me, but encountering and seeing it certainly diminishes me, certainly hurts me, whether I know it or not, and it does not hurt me if they get a little health care or a little hand up or a little something.
Yeah, because that's it. We are one group, and we're all just looking to survive and to live a life. And if it doesn't affect me, I'm not going to lose anything out. So why shouldn't we be looking to help those people that do need it?
Did you know one final thing? Did you notice the two crosses at the end?
On the hill, yes.
Yeah, that the grave has two crosses, and that was really, not to annotate it, but that was really important to me. Of sort of like, that's a big point for me at the end, like that the way they saw themselves as two individuals was honored by the true, and I'm sure that there were, a lot of conjoined twins who got thrown into a grave, and that grave might say Daisy and Dottie, but it's got one headstone, and I like, maybe it applies to trans rights or self-determination, but
I'm thinking that the one story I know of is Yin and Yang, the Chinese conjoined twins that had a similar experience. So I think they only got one. Maybe in a way, obviously, this sort of thing makes me think of like John Merrick as well in that sort of situation, and those sorts of things.
Thanks for indulging me and reading my, I chose this because it has made me cry, and I cry at my own comics. So,
But if we can express ourselves, that's that's the point of doing these creative endeavors. And so I do. The one thing I would say is there's no excuse for it. Everything we have talked about today is available on Comixology. So if it's not in this digital age, it's not easy, it's not hard to find these. If you want to read along with us, go find them. And as you say, sort of Martian Lit, they're all on Comixology, martianlit.com. There's a link in the notes down below. Go check out. You're on Twitter. Well, you blow your own horn, Julian, before we sort of we get to it.
I mean, and we're on Stories Out of Time and Space podcast every other week. You can check us out there if you like our repartee and our knowledge of each other. If you're not listening to that, you should be.
Definitely. And the good thing is they're alternate, so you're always going to at least hear me on a weekly basis. Yeah. So that's but also we're doing much more things. If you do like what we're doing on this podcast as well, or on Stories and Out of Time and Space, both available on this podcast and all of the podcasts are available on all podcast catchers. If you like what we do, go leave a review. Just go on your podcast catcher, preferably 5 stars, but if you want to leave less, that's fine. But any review is good. We like to see them. I often go out and have a look. And it gets up the ratings, lets people know we're there. But if you really like what you're doing, and you like what Julian and I are doing, check out the Patreon. It's patreon.com/20cg media. And one of the things we're doing on there, that Julian and I are trekking through the Twilight Zone from the 1959 and 1960 original series, the Rod Serling Twilight Zone, an episode a week, in little nugget-size, bite-size episodes. We aim for about 15 minutes, which we usually hit. There are a few where we overrun because they're brilliant, or we might be doing something a bit different. So, but go and check that out, and that is at the basic level. That's just at the bottom level. Okay, that's a weekly podcast about the Twilight Zone at the bottom level. So imagine what else you're getting on all those other benefits. All kinds of podcasty things and behind-the-scenes bits and pieces. All of it excellent. Go check out the Patreon. The link for that is also in the bottom. But Julian, thank you for coming on. This is, it's always good to talk comics.
It's been a joy. Thanks for indulging me.
That is great. I always enjoy doing this. And starting me off on The Flash, making me think, I've got to go back and read Miracle Man, and introduce me to Kimot Ren. So I've thoroughly enjoyed it. It's good to go back to I like going back to the desert island. I do like this idea of people choosing them through comics. It works well. I will have you back at some point on 20CG, because the other one I've started to do now, and so I'll leave you to think about this, is we do story time, 20th Century Geek story time, and the point of that is to pick a short story. It can be the only criteria is it has to have been published in the 20th century. That's it. It can be any short story, and I've done 2 so far. The first one has been released. I did work with Tony to do oh my god, The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. I've got another one coming, which I'm not going to say yet because I've got it set up to go. So I've got another one to go. But I will have you back to talk about short stories at some point.
I'd be delighted.
Yeah, it's good fun. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening. Do go check out our sister podcast, and we shall talk to you again soon.